And welcome back to another episode of TWiP Weddings. Once again, I'm Bruce Clark, and I am joined by my second shooters slash assistants slash great photographers, Robert Evans, Bryan Caprici. Good morning, gentlemen.
Hola.
Good morning.
Hola. Well, you're not actually my second shooters, but that's our topic this week. So
We're
I
your
was trying to be,
sidekicks.
I was trying to be clever with my introduction, and that was a fail.
It worked for me. I'm good with it.
Okay, awesome. So as I mentioned this week, we're going to change things up a little bit. We're going to change the order of the show a little bit, and we want to get some feedback from you guys. We're actually going to dive into our main topic right off the top, and then we'll cover our listener questions and our picks of the week at the end of the show. So we're going to switch it up a little bit. Let us know what you think. We're going to go with this format for the next few episodes, and we'd love to get your feedback on it and hear how we're doing. So this week, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about second shooters. We're going to be talking about the pros and cons of working with a second shooter, how to find them, what to look for in a good second shooter, best ways to use a second shooter, and if you are a second shooter, what are some things to keep in mind, and how to be a great second shooter. But before we dig into that, we just want to remind you the number of ways that you can get in touch with us and participate in the show. First off, you can visit the website at thisweekinphoto.com/weddings, and there you're going to find the show notes for each episode, and the show notes contain links to everything that we mentioned on the show. You can also leave your comments and feedback for us in the comments section. If you do have a question or a suggestion for a topic for a future episode, you can also email us. Our email address is twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com. Or if you're more of the social media type, just send out a tweet, use the hashtag TWiPWed, and we'll check the feed and watch for your posts on Twitter and other social networks. And we're also on Instagram. If you want, you can follow us. We're over there at TWiPWed. I posted a photo the other day.
I was going to say, wait, before you say that again, Bruce, are we actually doing something?
We are. I did. I put up a photo the other day
Awesome.
from my mountain shoot that I did when we got stuck in a blizzard.
Awesome.
And so I did some stuff with some backlighting in a freak blizzard snowstorm. So you can check
Sounds
that
fun
out
to me.
on Instagram. So awesome. All right. Well, let's jump into the show. So we want to talk about second shooters. We've kind of briefly mentioned second shooters, in other episodes, but we wanted to take this episode to really kind of dive into it a little bit further, share some of our experiences either working as second photographers, second shooters, or finding second shooters and finding a good, reliable second shooter. So I want to sort of throw it out just to both of you guys to kind of kick off the conversation. The whole concept of a second shooter, is this something that's relatively new, or has it been around for a while? It seems like nowadays everybody seems to go out with a second shooter. Has it always been that way? Robert, I'm going to throw it to you. You're the kind of the senior on the of the group here.
The senior tour.
Yep. Yeah. So has it always been the case? Has second photographers been kind of the norm, or is it a relatively new phenomenon?
I would say for a long while now. I mean, even when I started assisting, when I was training, again, 88 in the time. I assisted, but you remember we were shooting Hasselblad and film, and so I learned to load film backs and hand the photographer stuff, but I didn't really shoot much. And then when I started training, it was more like, here, go shoot dance candids with the Hasselblad and get used to shooting it, that type of thing. But I wasn't responsible for getting content at the actual event. And then I would say, gosh, when did I start using assistants? I shot weddings for a long time by myself because that's what everybody did back then. And then I think once I started shooting 35mm film, then it was kind of better to have an assistant. And I think once I started having second shooters, I kind of never really looked back. I think it's kind of a necessity because people are going to see things that you don't. We can get into all those ideas, but that's kind of what I've told my second shooters. I want you to shoot things that I'm not seeing. If I'm doing the family portraits at the time, like I want you watching the bridal party and the guests and the kids and and doing that. Don't shoot what I'm shooting type of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I've always used them. It seems inevitably like people have them now. I mean, of course we have, we're talking about it because second shooters is a topic, and there's apps. Sneak peek to my pick of the day, and things like that revolve around that whole world. So I think this is a great topic to talk about.
Brian, how about you? Do you think that this is a newer phenomenon in terms of the second shooter, as opposed to maybe assistants back in the day, or is it something that you think's been around for
Yeah,
quite a
I
while?
think I think it is a newer phenomenon. I mean, I haven't been in the industry certainly for as long as Robert have. I've been a photographer now full time for about 10 years, um, and like I remember even when I first got started, it was less of hey, can I second shoot with you, and more like hey, can I intern with you, or can I like sort of apprentice with you? And it was more of like an obvious sort of master apprentice type of model as opposed to a hey, I have a camera, let me come shoot with you, and maybe I can use those for my portfolio. So I wonder if sort of just the way that it's presented today is perhaps a little bit newer. I think the idea of it is not necessarily new. We've always had it where a photographer would have an assistant with them, and I think even in that today, second shooter is also used very loosely. I think a lot of photographers that say they have a second shooter are also, that second shooter is an assistant or helping them on a wedding day or helping them organize things, and they're not necessarily shooting the whole day either. Certainly, I'm sure we're going to get into the discussion about sort of whether we use them or not, or why, and all that kind of thing. But just quickly, for me, I actually don't use second shooters, and I never actually have. Sorry, I say I never have. I have on a couple of occasions, but I do that very intentionally because for my own reasons, and we can talk about those in a little bit. But I always like to ask the question. This is something that I'll just again encourage to our listeners is like asking the question why. Right, like with everything that we do, we've talked about this. I remember even back on a previous episode where we were talking about, well, what products should a wedding photographer offer? Well, it's like, well, ask yourself, like, what products do you want to offer, right? Or it's like, should I have a second shooter? Ask yourself, why do you want a second shooter? And then I think that will give you greater clarity as to what makes sense for you. So, today the three of us are going to talk about what we do, but I think even with that, you listening at home, you need to think about what makes sense for you, your business model, what can you afford, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So well, let's dig in right there then. Why would you use a second shooter versus say an assistant? And let's maybe talk about the distinction between those two things. What would be the difference, I guess, between us? I mean, it's probably fairly obvious, but let's just dig into it. What's the difference really between a second shooter versus as opposed to an assistant? How might you use them differently?
Well, I would define the assistant as just overall helper that day. You're maybe carrying my bags, you're getting me water, you're,
Nope. Robert froze up in the middle of conversation.
I think
he needs an assistant.
Picking up, yeah, I think he needs a technical assistant.
Yeah.
Picking up for maybe where Robert is, in my mind, the distinction is this: a second shooter is there for the couple in terms of they're there to take pictures of the couple, and an assistant is there for me to help me with things, help with workflow, carrying things, getting me things, organizing timelines. So in my mind, it's like typical when you look at any executive that has an assistant. That assistant is basically there to make that person's life easier. And so on a wedding day, if I have an assistant, their job is to help make my day easier, to carry things, to organize things, to sort things, to give me things, to care, whatever it is. Whereas a second shooter is there to photograph for the couple and sort of be another version of me on the wedding day. That would be sort of how I would distinguish it, and that was just me picking it up from Robert. Robert is back, so I don't know if Robert, you want to jump back in?
Yeah, I heard what you said, and I think that's the same thing. The assistant is just there to kind of support in whatever role they can.
Yep.
Whereas the second shooter has a responsibility to capture images, and I'm going to hold them accountable for that at the end of the day.
Right.
What about the concept of sort of a hybrid? Can the hybrid person who maybe they're assisting, and then like Robert said, maybe you're shooting at different parts of the day, like candids during the cocktail hour or something like that. Is that?
Yeah, that's a model that I use. So how I said earlier that I don't use second shooters, that's why I corrected myself, because my assistant, who happens to be my wife, because she's been with me through every wedding I've ever photographed, she's there to assist me primarily, but in the morning she will do some detail shots, and sometimes during the ceremony she'll get one shot from the balcony of the bride walking down the aisle. But other than that, for me, I use her primarily as an assistant. But I think that definitely the hybrid role is probably more effective for most photographers, because and again, this could get into the whole debate of whether second shooters are even useful or not, but in my opinion, for most parts of the day, having a second set of eyes isn't all that valuable. It's just going to add clutter, it's going to add overwhelm, it's going to add more images that you have to then go and sift through and edit and work with. Whereas in my opinion, having an assistant during those times where a second shooter isn't useful is more useful for me. So I think the hybrid approach would probably fit most photographers better. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I would, like I would agree. I mean, my wife is also my second shooter. I probably use, or she probably is more of a second shooter necessarily than an assistant. In our case, I'll have her photographing. Like a lot of the weddings we do, the brides and grooms tend to get ready in like completely opposite ends of the city or completely opposite locations. So we need to have that second person that's going to go and photograph sort of the groom part getting ready. I usually go with the girls, and then we'll come back together at the ceremony, and then our focuses are usually on different areas. My focus is usually on, the bride and getting her coming down the aisle, whereas she's more focused on the groom and his reaction to seeing her. I'll try and spin around and get a few of those myself, but if I know she's focused on those, then I can keep my focus entirely on, on the bride. And then at other times she's assisting. So like during family photos, for example, she's there more to kind of help organize. She's watching for small details. She's fixing, chains and buttons and, boutonnieres and whatever else might be going on, and kind of helping out while I'm doing the shooting. And then, during the formal part, I'm doing most of the shooting, and then she's kind of catching maybe the different angles or catching more of the in-between moments or more of those candid kind of moments. Or just, when the bridesmaids are off to the side doing their thing, while I'm shooting the bride and groom, maybe she's capturing a few candids of them. So that's kind of how we work together in terms of, my second shooter. But Robert, you brought this up in a previous episode, I think, in terms of how you like to use your second shooter. In some cases, you have them doing a lot of the formal family photos and some of the the things where you like to be behind the scenes and catching some of those more candid moments.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like I actually play the role of second shooter at times. And second shoot at my own weddings. So what you were referring to is like a lot of times when we're doing the bigger family groups, I will actually direct. So I deal with the client and the people and put mom and dad and grandma and aunts and uncles and place them and get them all set, and then I'll step to the side and then let my photographer shoot that group. And he might arrange. I have one guy that I particularly work with a lot and has worked with me for many years that I trust. So that is important to note. You have to have someone that you really trust. So I'll direct that, and I deal with the families, and I think it just goes a little bit smoother. Because I'm kind of just the friendly director, and then he's pushing the button. He'll refine, if people aren't exactly where they need to be, or, we communicate, the two of us, the whole time. Another situation, I don't like to shoot processional. I probably haven't shot a processional in 10 years. But I let my second shooters do that. But I stay in the back of the church, the aisle, wherever we are. I spend the last 20 minutes with my bride and her girls and parents, whoever, walking down the aisle, and sort of shoot those behind-the-scene moments as they lead up to the wedding. And then I do get a reverse angle of the bride going back up the aisle. During the ceremony, we both my second shooter, Josh, I mean, he has his own business, but we've been together for years, and he shot with me. We don't even have to talk. We literally could not talk to each other at a wedding. And we know what our roles are. During the ceremony, he'll flank one side, I'll flank the other. We get close-ups of each person giving vows, or if he's under the chuppah, if it's a Jewish wedding, and I'm like, wow, it's kind of tight or whatever. I don't need to be under there because I trust him, and I'll go in the back and shoot wides. And there's the same instances where that's reversed. Like if he knows I'm up under there and we both can't be on either side, then we kind of do that. During reception, a lot of the times I'll even shoot available, he'll shoot flash, but we'll communicate toasts, all right, you get tight, I got reaction, you get the person talking, I got reaction, and we'll switch that up a lot. But I think the key here is to make sure that you have a good second assistant that you can trust and that you're confident in. For those of you that are kind of, it's new to you, or you don't have regular ones, then yes, you need to take charge, because ultimately at the end of the day, you are the one responsible if those images are not there or bad.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into the next question that I had, and that's, how do you go about finding a great second shooter? I mean, I found my second shooter in a bar 13 years ago and married her, so that worked out okay for me. But I don't think that's the usual way that people go about finding their second shooters.
I bet she works for cheap too.
Well, some days. So, Bryan, let's start with you. In terms of, I mean, obviously your wife is your assistant slash second shooter as well, but for those maybe who aren't working with their spouse, what are some ways to find a second, a good assistant or a good second shooter? I see all kinds of like Facebook groups out there, and people sometimes pulling into some random person that they've maybe never worked with or met in person before. What are your kind of thoughts on where to go about finding and getting a good second or assistant?
Okay, so it's probably, again, not surprising for you guys, and perhaps even for our listeners at this point, that I probably have some pretty strong opinions on this topic.
Is the word intention in here somewhere? I'm going to guess it is.
Okay, but this is why I have a strong opinion about this. If you were to look at any other business and like remove photography from it, let's say that you're opening like you run a cafe or you have an insurance agency or you teach music lessons, like whatever your business is, explain to me a time where you would just randomly reach out to someone that you have no relationship with, had never worked before, and invite them on the one thing that you make a living from. Like when we really think about that for a second, a wedding day is where we make our money. That is the only place as wedding photographers where we make our money. Like what we do on that wedding day is what provides our living and our career and our lifestyle for the rest of the week, the rest of the year. I can't imagine a time where I would just bring some random out to a wedding and trust them on a day like that. Because that's where I make my living. That's a pure reflection of me. If I'm going to make that client happy, it's on that day. If I'm going to get referrals from anyone at the wedding, it's going to be from what I do on that day. And so for me, it's super important to have a really strong relationship and really understand who it is that you're bringing out with you as a second shooter, because they are a reflection of you. And so I really don't think that we should just be doing, I see this all the time and it drives me nuts when I see photographers on Facebook publicly saying something like, hey, I need a second shooter for tomorrow. Who wants to come? It's like, are you kidding me? If I was a groom and I saw my photographer posting that, I'd be like, I'm paying you how many thousands of dollars for you to do a Facebook posting the night before saying, hey, can I have a second shooter? Anyone will do that has a camera. Like, come on, really? So my opinion, to kind of get to the crux of the answer, now that I've gotten the rant out of the way, is that I really think that we should be like interviewing second shooters like we would interview any employee that we hire, because they're as important, if not more important, than anyone else that's involved in our business, because they are a direct reflection of us. But I think that it should be the same person consistently. I think that you should have that kind of consistency, much like how Robert says how he understands how his second shooter thinks, and his second shooter understands how he thinks. Bruce, I think for you and I, it's the exact same thing. Like our wives understand how we are because we have that built-in communication mechanism.
Right.
So just with one look, we know exactly what they're thinking, and they know exactly what we're thinking. Well, we have that. We're lucky because it's our wives, but I think that we need to have that same level of understanding and that same sort of mutual
kind of.
Yeah, that same, like, you have to communicate on the same level, and you can't do that if it's someone that you don't know and don't have a relationship with. So in short, well, I guess in long turn short, I think that you should interview for a second shooter and have someone that's consistent at every single wedding so you can develop that kind of deeper relationship with them.
So what you're saying is
a little bit.
Sorry?
Yeah, go for it.
Interject a little bit.
Do it.
Yeah, I want to find out how you found your second.
Well, so the millions of our listeners right now are thinking, really? They have 1 million listeners? They're thinking, well, okay, even if I interview them, then how do I actually know how good they shoot? So one of the things that I do, of course, I get a lot of people that ask me to second shoot.
Right.
I mean, so I get the flood of people, can I come shoot with you? Can I come shoot with you?
Mm-hmm.
And I've always been as gracious as I can over the years about allowing not anyone, but like the people that are really persistent and follow through, or the magic works. But what I will do is, I don't care how good you are. Like, I've had Brooke students come to me. I've had kids that just love photography off the street, and some of the kids off the street were better than the Brooke students. But I let them come to a wedding with me as a third shooter, and I say, I kind of tell them what I want. I want you to shoot emotion. I want you to shoot whatever. I said, just have fun all day long. I just want to see what you see. Because I want to see what their eye is. So going back to, like, people come to me from Brooks and say, oh, I'm just this great photographer, and they were terrible. And then, I had this one guy, this is the funniest story. This one guy came into my studio one time, and Josh, who's my second shooter who worked for me for a long time, he's like, oh my gosh, wait till you see this guy. I walk into the room, and you got to give the guy A for effort. But, I mean, eager beaver, he had a tripod and everything strapped to his belt and everything, like, coming in to see me. And I had to kind of, like, not laugh in his face. But I gave him A for effort. And he just loved photography. And he had just this basic portfolio that was just, you know, I could tell he had an eye, but it wasn't professional. But I let him come out and shoot, and he was pretty damn good. You know, so you never know. But I think you know, you just have to. I think that's how I do it, anyways. Allow them to come as a third shooter, fourth shooter, however many seconds you have. You know, we can get into the ethics of that, but you know, and just see what they see. You know, and then, you know, you can actually, and not even just what they see, but you can see how they dress when they come to your wedding, how they deal with the guests. I mean, all those little things that are going to be important. Their attitude. So anyway, that's my interjection.
Yeah, that's a good segue. So I guess my idea of a Tinder app for matching photographers with seconds is not going to take off then, Bryan? You don't think so?
Well, okay. I think it's healthy for our listeners to hear these different opinions, and perhaps maybe like we can hear some other thoughts in here. Bruce, maybe get you to chime in too. But I actually, just for me, I don't agree with that model that Robert's talking about, and again, that's where I think it's totally fine that we have different views on it. But I would rather not treat a wedding day that I've got a couple paying me $8,000 on as a test where I'm seeing whether or not someone's going to fit me and my brand or not. Because here's the thing: if they're not, then I'm all of a sudden introducing that person to my clients, and they're also going to pay for a meal for that photographer, and so on and so forth. And so for me, I don't like to treat it that way. I'd rather bring them out to a mock shoot. I'd rather look at their portfolio. I'd rather do some other kind of testing that isn't a wedding day, that is where everything is on the shoulders of my wedding day. And I would rather not treat the wedding day as that test. And that's just me, though.
I don't let my third shooters eat, so there's not a problem there.
So there you go. If you want to shoot with Robert Evans, you have to come to a wedding day and you don't get to eat. And just be persistent, because then he'll actually let you come out.
I've done that before too, where actually, I mean, some of them have stayed the whole day because, again, the effort that they want to put in. But
yeah,
you know, where I'm like, just come for, you know, through the ceremony, and then you can go. You don't have to stay for the reception. I just want to see what you see. And my clients never see those pictures. I mean, unless they're amazing, I'll throw one or two in. But it's really just a test.
Right.
Yeah, we have used. No, there have been a couple instances where we were looking at bringing somebody else on as either an assistant or maybe a third, kind of as a backup second shooter. You know, just in case there's some instances where my wife can't be with me that day or whatnot. And so I'm fairly involved with NATE, which is our local kind of polytechnical institute where they have a photography program. And there's a few different ways. I do some mentorship there. They have like a critique course, and I'm a guest speaker there and things like that. So I get to know the NATE students fairly well, and quite often a lot of them, you know, there's at least a handful of them that are interested in getting into wedding photography, and so I found that's a resource in terms of finding good potential second shooters or good assistants. And what we've done in the past with them is actually had them come out as like kind of like Robert, not necessarily to shoot, to kind of come out to observe, maybe help us a little bit with, you know, carrying gear. We said it's not glamorous work, but it's going to give you a feel for what a typical wedding day is like. And sometimes they might find after that, you know, maybe weddings aren't their thing. Maybe it wasn't what they thought it was going to be. But you know, if we find that it works out, you know, then we might bring them to another wedding and let them shoot a little bit. And like you see, sort of like Robert, see what their eye is like, see how they capture things, see what they see. I know some other photographers in town here that I also second shoot with. Sometimes they'll bring on somebody, and that's all they'll have them do is just accompany them on the day. They're not there to shoot. They let the couple know that they're there as kind of a student intern, just to observe. Obviously they get the, you know, approval from the client first to make sure that they're okay with them coming, and they just want to sort of assess and see, you know, what do they show up in. I was second shooting with them once, and they had, you know, this person show up, and they showed up in jeans and, you know, in a shirt, and they just said, you know, sorry, go home. And they just sent them right away, and they said that's basically it. Like, one strike, they're out. Like, if that's how they show up to a wedding, that's, you know, it's going to be a reflection, you know, on their business. So, you know, that's sort of a bit of a hybrid, I guess, between Bryan and Robert, is that, you know, I've seen that model applied where you can kind of bring somebody on to sort of not necessarily third shoot, but just kind of be there and sort of observe them, see how they interact with people.
Right, and I think the important thing is, like, I mean, that's a great thing. Like, I love that Bryan shares his opinion because we all have a different view on it, and our listeners just need to take what resonates with them.
Exactly.
They can take the advice, but like think what resonates with them and how it works with their business, because what I do may not work. So.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a second shooter or even an assistant, what are some of the qualities? What are some of the things you're looking for in a good second shooter or in a good assistant? Robert, I'll throw it to you.
Let's do do's and don'ts. So great habits of second shooters, and we're all going to have different ones. And then we'll do don'ts. Definitely don't as a second shooter. I like a second shooter. I think that works hard, of course, that shows up and is excited, that, of course, we just touched on that, dresses appropriately, and thinks, outside of the box or thinks ahead of me, anticipates for me, just ask, can I get you, or, whatever. I mean, especially in the beginning, but, I mean, shooting what I'm not shooting, someone that reminds you, like time sync, of course, that's super important. So maybe someone that at the beginning of the day reminds you, hey Robert, we need a time sync. Oh crap, I forgot it. Yeah, we do. Things that are going to save me time and effort later. I like someone that is polite and presentable to my clients, as I work with a higher end clientele. So I have to consider who can I put in front of my client as well. What are some of the other things? That don't complain. Sometimes it's a long day. I pay one flat rate, and whether we work 9 hours or 12 hours, that's what it's going to be. That's, I think, super important. And somebody that's detail oriented, that kind of does the things, and that really just has my back. I guess they're going to shoot the things that I didn't see, and so those are just some quick. I'm sure I'll think as you guys tell more, I'll think of other ones. But
so those are some of the good do's. Bryan, how about you? What are some of the things you would look for in a aside from the things you look for in your wife? Those don't count.
So long hair, attractive, has
beautiful eyes,
family values as I do. Okay, so I've actually, so you guys know, what I'm doing through Sprout, and we're building the software, and we've got a team here that we've been building. So actually, over the past 6 months or so, I've actually gone through this sort of hiring process, reiterated many, many times. Certainly, it's not to the same level of, or not the same level, but it's different than hiring a second photographer or a second shooter or an assistant. But I've gone through the hiring thing to sort of figure out what I'm looking for, what I'm not looking for. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I've really learned is that, and this is something that's preached in the HR and the leadership world all over the place, but it's hire for the person, not for the skill. Now, I know that that's kind of hard to say, to sort of stand strong on that in like a creative space like photography, because you don't want to hire someone that's like a really dynamic person and then they're like a crappy photographer, because that's not going to work. But I think in general, I always put more emphasis on the person and the personality and what they're like as a person than I do necessarily on their skill set, because skill set can be learned, and if they have the kind of personality where they're open to learning and they're independent and they're driven, then they can learn at a rate that's going to be much faster than someone that has really crappy habits, that might be a good shooter but isn't open to learning or growing or changing. So for me, I would always recommend, and also because, like I've already said, this second photographer, this assistant, is going to be a reflection of you, your brand, and everything that is your photography business to your client and to their guests. And so I would rather hire someone that is a really great person to have with me on the wedding day and is a great, solid reflection of my brand, that maybe has work to do on their photography skills. I'd rather hire that person over someone that's an amazing photographer but is a jerk on the wedding day. So for me, that's always where I'd put the priority. And again, that also comes down to that whole question that I said earlier, like, who are you hiring and why are you hiring them? If it's an assistant, I don't need them to have any skill set coming into it. I just want to have someone that's easy to get along with, is open, is quick to adapt to things, and I can just show them what I need them to do. If it's a shooter, then sure. I mean, I want it. That sort of narrows my pool down because I need to know about photography and how to shoot. But I'm still going to hire for personality before I hire for anything else, or at least put more weight on that side of the equation.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a big part, right? And I still second shoot today for a lot of photographers, and one of some of the feedback that I get is they just really enjoy working with me. So the
Right.
personality is something that they remember, and I think has a more lasting impression that sometimes than even the images.
Mm-hmm.
That they take. They'll remember the experience they had with that person. So like you say, if you bring somebody on board who's maybe a complete opposite to you and is maybe loud and gregarious, and you're more quiet and soft spoken, the couple maybe were attracted to you as the photographer initially, and then you bring in this other person that's a complete contradiction to what they were expecting.
Mm-hmm.
It can create a bit of a weird dynamic. So I think if you're considering becoming a second shooter, I think one of the things to consider is sometimes you have to learn to maybe check your ego a little bit at the door, or maybe check your personality a little bit at the door. I mean, we don't want robots. We want people to show their personalities, but maybe if you're like an over-the-top type of personality, you want to match your personality a little bit to the photographer you're going to work with, and kind of almost be a little bit of a chameleon and be able to assume a bit of a different character somewhat, so that you're not, being this dominant personality sort of overtaking the main photographer. It's easy to come in, I think, especially if you have experience, maybe to come in with a bit of an ego and say, things like, oh, I got to carry bags, or oh, I got to go get Robert more water, or whatever, like whining and complaining. I think you have to kind of, if you want to get ahead in the industry, I think you really have to kind of, you got to take those experiences. You're going to learn from those experiences, and you have to be prepared to kind of check your ego at the door and not see those things as being like beneath you. We've seen that sometimes where students come out of school, right, and they don't have any experience yet, but they just think because they've been through school that now they're the best thing in the world, and they don't, carrying bags or doing things like that is kind of beneath them. So I look for initiative. I look for willingness to kind of learn, adaptability, and like Bryan said, personality is a big thing. Obviously, we want them to have a good eye, and skills can be taught to a certain extent, but I don't have time on the day to teach them what aperture and f-stop is. So hopefully they're going to come to me with those, with those skills. But some of the other things can be learned through experience, I think.
Yeah, a good exercise, I think, for addressing all the photographers out there that have experience, have been shooting for weddings for a long time, and I've actually done this. Go second shoot a wedding with a friend of yours. Go do it and be the one that's the second shooter. Now, I've mentioned Josh before. I think we've worked together forever. Now, I've shot second for him on jobs, where we've just gone out and done it. And I let him be my boss, and he'll say stuff to me because I've been doing this forever, and I let my second shooters do a lot of the stuff that I don't want. So now I have to go shoot the things that I don't like shooting, like cocktail photos and things like that. And it's really and he'll be like, "Go do that," he'll get on me, and it's really interesting to be on the other side of that. So it's a really, really good exercise to actually second shoot yourself as a lead photographer. So, I mean, it's kind of fun. By the way, I'll second shoot at anybody's wedding, but it's going to be expensive. You can hire me.
So, a question I want to ask you guys a little bit about kind of training, equipment, that type of stuff. So, when you find somebody, let's say you go through this interview process, or you network with other photographers, and you find somebody that's interested in becoming an assistant or a second shooter. Do you provide any type of training, and do you expect them to come with their own equipment, or do you provide gear for them? What's your thoughts on those?
Go ahead, Bryan.
Okay, so again, I don't have second shooters, so I'll kind of weigh in quickly and then let you guys, because it sounds like you guys use them perhaps more than I do. But my opinion would be, if you're hiring a second photographer, then it's expected that photographer brings their own equipment and brings their own skill set. You're not necessarily training them. However, if you're hiring an employee that's going to be a second photographer for you and be a part of your company, then yes, I think putting them through training is totally reasonable. I think with anyone, there's going to be a certain level of setting of expectations. Like, even if I were to bring another photographer out that already is a professional photographer and I want them to second shoot for me, I'd want to sort of educate them on, here's how I do things, here's what's expected of you. So training is it actual formal training? No, but there's going to be sort of a reset of expectations. I think either way, I think that's important to do. But I think that in terms of whether they have equipment and all that kind of thing, I think if you're hiring a second shooter, then that's expected that they bring that kind of thing with you, unless of course you're hiring someone to be a part of your company, in which case you should be providing that kind of stuff for them.
Yeah, Robert, how about you?
Yeah, I agree with all that. And I would expect them to have their own equipment. I like what Bryan had to say about, someone that's presentable and malleable and not necessarily skilled. Yeah, because here, keep in mind, if you're second shooting for a photographer that's been doing it for a while, you're getting a great education. A lot of times why people second shoot is because they don't have their own businesses yet and they want to work towards that. And it's such a catch-22 in today's world, because when I, was coming up in the business, I worked for 3 studios and then went out and opened my own business. And now as a second shooter, yeah, you want to shoot weddings, but how do you get to shoot weddings because you don't have samples? So then you go out and second shoot to try to get some samples, but you shouldn't really be using those samples as your portfolio, if it's, we haven't done the don'ts, and that's one of them. But it's about having ethics, or that, like, again, going back to Josh, who's worked with me forever. I mean, he's always been just a great guy, like I mentioned, and he's always had my back, and he's honest, and like whatever Josh wants to use, I don't care, because he's an amazing photographer. But I mean, if you're new and you come and work with someone, you don't just go take pictures at their wedding and then start putting them up, because you know what my feeling is with that, and I had somebody do that to me years ago. Like, you did not earn the right to be at that Four Seasons wedding that I was shooting, and now you're taking photos at it and pretending like you did. And that's what it looks like if you stick those on your blogger. Oh, look at this really beautiful wedding that I did. No, you didn't earn the right to be there. So that goes back to, like, you have to have an agreement. One of my picks a few weeks ago was Law Togs, and there's contracts there too for the photographer and the second shooter as an agreement. But I don't want to go off on that tangent. We can do our don'ts, but that's definitely a don't. You need to have ethics, and you need to communicate that with whoever you're working for about how you use those images.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, is that setting that expectation and having that communication ahead of time, and making sure that both, the photographer and the second shooter are on the same page as far as, image use and where those images can go. Can they use them in their portfolio? Can they put them up on their blog? Can they, put them up on Facebook? Everybody has different policies and different, things. I think it's important to have a policy in place for your studio, and you want to stick to that policy, particularly if you're working with more than one second shooter. I know several photographers who they don't have one main second shooter. They may have a couple of second shooters, just because I think a lot of times a lot of second shooters, myself included, also may have their own businesses. So they may be shooting their own weddings separately, and doing second shooting maybe on the side, or as they get more experience, they start to, pick up more weddings. So having a policy in place, I think, is really important for a studio, and really thinking about, what are the implications of somebody else using those images. You have to consider your clients' expectations. What are their thoughts in terms of sharing the images. We have some clients that we work with that are very private, and they don't want their images shared online or on social media or on a blog. So you want to make sure that that's communicated, I think, to your second shooters as well, and make sure they understand the policy and agree to it. So definitely having policies in place is certainly important as well. Otherwise, who knows what can happen, right? You got to make sure you set those expectations and have those conversations with the second shooter.
Well, it has to go beyond the conversation too. I mean, I hate to get back into the legal part of it, but I know there's like some serious contracts, because then it comes also to, like, who owns the images. Technically, if you push a button on a camera, it's your copyright, unless otherwise signed your rights away. So that maybe we could do a future show and have I forget her name. What's the girl?
Rachel's her name.
Rachel. And have her on, and let's talk about some just legal issues, and that could be one of them. The agreement between the second photographer and the photographer, and
Yeah, Bryan, what are your thoughts on the second shooters and using the images for their portfolio, or if they're wanting to build a portfolio? What's your take on that?
If I'm paying you to be there to shoot for me on a wedding day, you are working for me.
Sing it, brother.
And the images are mine, and you're shooting for me, and you do not have the ability to share those images and pass them off as your own. Yes, I'm very strongly opinionated on that, but also it's because I think there's been so much gray area on this conversation And like, for crying out loud, again, like, what are we doing here as a business? If I'm hiring you to photograph for me and I'm paying you good money, which I would pay a second shooter good money, that is not your wedding. You do not pass that off as your wedding. You cannot build your portfolio with that wedding. If you want to build your portfolio and you want to be second shooting for me, I'm not paying you. You're basically interning with me. In fact, if anything, you should be paying me. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of like what Robert says. It's like, gosh, I have students all the time that are asking me to second shoot with them, and I always say no at a wedding because I'm not going to bring a student out to learn from me at the one point in my business where I actually make my living on the wedding day. And so if you want to learn from me, A, I'm definitely not paying you. B, you're probably going to be paying me, and I don't mean to say that from an egotistical standpoint, but I'm saying, like, let's look at the options. If you want to learn how to be a wedding photographer, what are you going to do? Either A, you're going to try and sort of tread in the deep end, possibly fail, make a bunch of mistakes, and upset a bunch of clients over an extended period of time. B, you're going to go to school for photography and pay a lot of money to do that. Or C, you can go and second shoot with someone that already knows what they're doing. Why is there not value in that just as much as there's value in paying to go to school? So if you're going to go and learn to be a photographer, if you're going to intern, I mean, look at the whole idea of interning or apprenticing. They don't get paid. You are basically getting education, and in exchange, you're lending your time and talent to that sort of master apprentice kind of model. So yeah, that's where I stand on it. If I'm paying you as a second shooter, those images are mine. At the end of the night, you give them back to me, and you never actually see them afterwards. If you're coming out as a second shooter and I'm not paying you, and we have an arrangement where you're doing it for experience, I think that it needs to be discussed what the expectations are with those images. Again, I think it needs to be a verbal conversation to make sure expectations are clear, but also it needs to be a legal contract that you both sign and both agree to. So that's sort of where my opinion stands on that.
And photographers that are out there going, well, how do I make sure that I get all the images? One thing you could do is you supply your seconds with the cards.
That's exactly what I suggest.
At the end of the day, you take those cards back. And
Yep.
that kind of solves that problem.
Exactly.
And I guess, really, if you had someone where you suspected maybe was doing it, well, you shouldn't be hiring them. But, a lot of cameras have 2 card slots these days. So, you want to make sure, here, this is the only card that's in this camera.
Yep.
Excellent. So maybe just kind of, do you guys second shoot as kind of a bit of a wrap up? Do you guys?
Don'ts, because we never did don'ts. So that we just touched.
Yeah. Actually, yeah. Let's do the don'ts. Yeah.
Let's go speed round don'ts.
Speed round don'ts.
Bruce, go.
Don't hand your business cards out at a wedding to the other people that are there if you're second shooting.
Amen. Don't look at your Facebook and/or post images from that wedding on your Facebook or any other social media page.
I will extend that and say, don't pull your phone out at the wedding.
Don't drink.
Don't hit on the bridesmaids or groomsmen.
That was going to be mine. Come on. Okay, I would say I have a do that's followed with a don't. Do be personable, but don't pretend like this is your wedding. So don't talk to the bride and groom as if they're your client. I want you to remember that you are there for me and you're representing me and you are a representation of my brand. So be personable, but don't treat it as if it's your own wedding.
Yeah, or to go the extension on the business cards, don't market yourself to the florist and the wedding planner and the hotel person and all those things. You're there representing whoever you're working for.
Mm-hmm.
Don't share images on the back of your camera, unless the photographer looks at them and says, yeah, you got to go show that to the couple.
Yeah. Don't complain. They're long days, you signed up for. There's such a sense of entitlement, especially in photography, but I think it's just in today's youth.
Kids these days.
Kids these days. But, yeah, I mean, you want to get far in life, you work hard. Like, just give 110% of yourself, and people will recognize that, and you will move up a ladder faster than you know it.
I'm running out of quick don'ts here. This lightning round has now gotten ahead of me. My mind isn't thinking to that extent. I'll pass and come back to me.
Don't get drunk.
Yeah, you said don't drink.
Don't drink, okay.
Don't make friends or like people's friends on Facebook, even if you're the bride and groom, the family.
Oh my gosh, yes, that's like today's version of passing out your business cards. Don't add the bride and groom on Facebook afterwards and start talking with them as if, again, like they're your client. No,
right.
Like you were representing me and my brand. I would say an extension even to that on the vendor side of things or even on the guest side of things, and I'll phrase it as a do because it's perhaps more positive. whenever you talk to anyone on that wedding day, make it very clear that you are there with me, that you are representing my brand. If you meet the florist, don't be like, oh yeah, I'm XYZ from XYZ Photography, but today I'm here with Bryan. It's like, no, I am shooting for Bryan today, and that's who I am.
Yeah, one of the
I am
things,
nothing else.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, one of the things you could do is ask the photographer that you're shooting with, hey, can you give me some of your business cards in case somebody asks?
Good call.
Right? And if somebody approaches you and says, hey, can I have one of your business cards? You're actually pulling out, their business card and handing that out, right? That's an initiative thing, right? You can show that initiative.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if somebody came up to me and said, beginning of the day, and I didn't think about it, Robert, can I have like 5 or 6 of your business cards? So if someone asked, I'd be like, oh my gosh. Like that would speak volumes.
I have another don't. Don't talk about anything technical in front of anyone other than each other. I've seen this, and just as a quick little side note, I've seen this in videographers where on the wedding day, in front of the bride and groom, as they're doing video, they're like, oh, what aperture are you on, man? What Kelvin are you shooting on? Oh, what lens is that? Are you getting wide? Are you getting tight? It's like, and it just, for us, we get it, but the bride and groom are like, oh my gosh, like their eyes are glazing over, and that's not the kind of experience that I want my brides and grooms to have. So if you have a technical question, if you have anything you want to talk about, either do it in private, whisper it quietly to me. Don't do that openly in front of the bride and groom.
No. Don't say anything inappropriate. Think about your language. Things like that. One of the things I've noticed too that when this is a little off kilter, but kind of the same, like when I do destinations and I'm in a hotel and you get there, like you have to watch what you say 2 days before you start that wedding because you have no idea who you're in the elevator with.
Mm-hmm.
Before you see all the guests. So that's super important. Just watch what you're saying and know who's around you.
Good call.
I have one more don't. Don't delete images as you're going along and shooting. So if you think you've taken a bad photo or something and you want to delete it, that's where a mistake could happen and you could end up deleting the wrong thing or hitting format or who knows what you could end up doing. So just leave them. The photographer's we all make mistakes. All photographers understand that not every shot is going to be the perfect shot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Still,
just so people feel comfortable, 27 years later, I still shoot shit out of focus. I still, have a bad exposure every once in a while. I still, and yes, those get deleted later, but we're all human, and none of us, not all 3,000 of our images on the wedding day are absolutely perfect.
Don't expect that we're going to be stopping for food or drinks. Bring your own lunch bag with food and drink.
Yeah.
That's a good one. I think that's a pretty good list of do's and don'ts. I think we've covered a few. So hopefully that's helped anybody that's considering becoming a second shooter or an assistant or looking to gain some experience or kind of break into the wedding industry. Do you think it's possible? Is there such a thing as a full-time second shooter, full-time assistant these days?
I think that's a great business model. Actually, I think there should be more of those because I feel like there's so many really, and I mean we've talked about this many times here on the show, guys. There's so many great photographers that just don't know how to run a business, and those kinds of photographers would make amazing full-time second shooters. They can just constantly do what they love. They get to be a photographer, and they don't have to worry about the marketing and the branding and the communications and like everything else that goes along with running a business. I actually feel like in the next 5 years, that market's going to open up even more. I feel like we need to see more full-time second shooters. Maybe we can lead the way with our podcast here and inspire photographers to say, hey, like if you don't want to run a business, that's okay. Like right now, if you want to be a wedding photographer, the only option is, well, I should open a wedding photography business. But I feel like that's flawed because you're setting photographers that don't like business up for failure. And so I would love to see more and more photographers that just love the craft of photography get into second shooting full-time.
I actually second shoot probably about 15 weddings a year still.
That's awesome.
I work with about 2 or 3 other photographers on a regular basis, and I love second shooting because it kind of it's a little bit liberating in some ways because it kind of frees me, like you say, from all of those. When you're the main photographer, you're kind of all the pressure's on you. You have to get kind of those safe shots. When you're the second shooter, you can kind of I feel I have a little more freedom to kind of play a little bit. I can experiment a little bit more. I can maybe try some things that maybe I wouldn't necessarily try as the main shooter. I don't have to worry about the editing and the post-production afterwards, which is kind of freeing, which is kind of nice. And like I say, you don't have to deal with all the business side of things. So I actually really enjoy still second shooting. It's a great way for me to kind of round out my calendar. So when I'm not booked or during off-peak season there's a lot of photographers here that tend to get more of the off-peak season, and I love second shooting those. It kind of rounds out my calendar, and I really enjoy it. So.
Well, and even when you look at the business mechanics of that, of being perhaps even a full-time second shooter, if you establish a really good relationship with some really high quality professional photographers, and they expect of you high quality second shooting, you're no longer an employee. You're like that hired second shooter that can justify a pretty decent salary for that day because they can rely on you, they can expect things from you, and it's almost like something that they can pitch to their clients, where it's like, no, I'm not just bringing someone that bought a camera at Best Buy last week. I'm actually bringing someone that does this full time, and all they do is second shooting. So a photographer, and again, guys, we haven't talked about pricing or anything, but a photographer could easily charge $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 as an add-on to add a second photographer, and then that photographer could then pass off $800, maybe $1,000 to that second shooter. If you do the math on that, if you were to do 30 to 40 second shooting gigs a year, you could make like a half decent salary doing that, just shooting.
Yeah, I know a lot. There's a few photographers that bring me along with them, specifically when they have venues where the lighting is going to be really challenging, because they're more natural light shooters, and
Right.
I bring a complement of off-camera flash skills and equipment with me. So I know if there's certain venues in the city that they know they're shooting at, they'll usually call me and say, please tell me you're available on this date, because it's a difficult or challenging environment, right? So
that's amazing.
That's kind of
there's photographers that do, what if you just shoot detail? Like the job that I just did in New York this weekend, we had 5 other photographers besides myself. It was a big job, but I had someone shooting detail that also kind of switched over and helped out cocktails. There was one person shooting scenic candids of the guests with New York City in the background, and then 2 people printing those and giving them out. And then I had a second shooter, and I think that's it. I think I covered everyone. But it depends on the job. So maybe if you love shooting detail, you could sell yourself to the photographer and say, hey, I'll come in and shoot detail at your events, and then maybe you only work 3 or 4 hours, and you charge $500 for it. Just detail.
Amazing.
There's all sorts of ways to think about that.
I think we're opening up. Like I'd love to keep going on this. Maybe we should stop. But I love the idea of like creating a business model around being a full-time second shooter. I mean, like look at what we do as professional photographers. I mean, you 3 of us, we've talked about this many times, of creating what your brand is, what your style is, and putting it out there to the world for brides to hire you based on that style. What if you did the exact same thing, but instead of marketing to brides, you marketed to other photographers? Like, what if you were an amazing, intimate photojournalistic shooter, and like your whole thing was that you shoot with a 35 millimeter lens, and you just get into the moments and you get these beautiful captured images? Like, you could pitch yourself to a photographer to say, hey, you do what you love to do on the wedding day. I'm going to get in there with all the guests, and I'm going to create some amazing moments that you can then give to your client on their wedding day. Oh my gosh, like I would hire that photographer in a second if they were so niched in what they could offer me as a second shooter. That would be an amazing business model.
Yeah.
Excellent. We've spawned a whole new business.
We should register secondshooter.com and start creating a little community there.
Yeah. hired gun for
hiredgun.com.
Hiredgun.com or something. Yeah. Perfect. Excellent. Well, I think we've given some people some good information and some good good food for thought on the topic of second shooters and assistants. But of course, if you've got additional questions for us, or we want to hear your feedback and your thoughts on the subject, be sure to comment on the blog post that's going to accompany this episode, or you can also email us, twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com. So before we wrap it up, we got a couple more segments. We want to go on and answer a quick listener question. And this week our question, it's actually a 2-part question, so we'll see if we can. I want to start with part 2, and we'll see how we do with part 1. So this week's question is from Felipe Arroyo. And Felipe wants to know, as a business owner and photographer, how do you calculate how to pay the business and pay yourself as the photographer? And his second part of the question is, having a second shooter or assistant, what is the average pay for the second shooter or assistant? So I want to start with the second part, and maybe the first part of his question we can build maybe a whole show around.
Yeah.
It's a Caparici question.
Caparici question. All right.
Okay.
Bryan, what do you think?
First of all, let me just point Felipe to thisweekinphoto.com Maybe we can even link to this, Bruce. But episode number 5 that we did, the three of us, we talked about pricing on that episode.
Yes.
So I think that if you want to dig a little bit deeper into the pricing conversation, even though it's not specifically about paying yourself, it still is about pricing and calculating pricing, and we do get into some really good details on that. So I would suggest going to check that episode out to dig a little bit deeper into it. In terms of breaking down sort of how you pay yourself versus how you pay your business, I think first of all, Felipe's mindset is definitely right. I love where he's at in saying that I am not my business. I am an employee of my business. And I think that we really need to have that kind of separation between church and state in our business of saying, okay, I'm working for my business, yes, but what salary do I want to make? And I think that you need to define that and then work your way up from there in terms of figuring out what kind of income you need to make as a business owner, and then what kind of income you need to make as a business. And again, that topic, you guys know I've written a book on pricing. I've had this conversation many, many times. I've literally had this conversation in a 4-hour seminar. So I don't think that answering it in like 2 minutes or 3 minutes here is going to do it justice. But just having that kind of separation is the first step. So I think Felipe is in the right direction. And then just sort of saying, here's what I want to make as a living. Like, what would I make as a living elsewhere? Like, if I was a teacher, if I was a lawyer, if I was an accountant, what would I be making if I wasn't a photographer? Maybe that's $60,000. Maybe that's $80,000. Whatever that number is, you need to now design your business around letting you make that living and make that income from your photography business. So in terms of how you ensure that, you need to put yourself on payroll. And whether that's actually where you're putting yourself on payroll or you're just strict enough to sort of take that same pay every single week and have it automatically transferred, whatever makes sense for you. But I think that separating what you make as a business and what you make as a personal income from your business, I think is really important. So that's where I would suggest there. In terms of having
I'll add on that before you talk about the second shooter. So there's sort of, again, you want to talk to your accountant. They're going to give you some advice. It depends also on how your business is structured. You may pay yourself a salary, or what some people do is take a dividend out of the company. And you'll want to talk again to your investment person, talk to your accountant. They can probably provide you some advice in that area as far as how to actually pay yourself.
Good call.
Okay, sorry, back to you, Bryan.
Cool, yeah, no, and then, I mean, in terms of paying the second shooter, again, I'll probably defer this question off to you guys because I don't do this. So for me, on those rare occasions that I have had someone, it's always been another professional photographer, and I believe in paying a good dollar for good quality. And so when I bring another second photographer out, I could pay them anywhere from $1,000 to $1,500 for their time on the wedding day. I have no idea if that's in line with what everybody else charges. So
Bryan, I'm coming out to Niagara.
I defer to you guys to see
Working
what you
for
think about that.
I think the price of what you pay your second shooter is based on experience, and like Bryan just said, like how good they are, and all of those. It all depends. I think. Like someone that works for me, second shoots, anywhere from $500 to $1,000, depending on a day, depending on where we are shooting. If it's local, it's probably less. If it's destination, it's more. Because you also have to consider if I'm taking someone on destination, just like I would charge, they have to be stuck with me even though we have a good time for 2 or 3 days. So it's not just because the clients.
You're going to have to pay a lot for that then, Rob.
The clients will, like even get people. I'm sure I get destination inquiries like, yeah, I'm getting married, and we just need you for 8 hours in Jamaica. Yeah, well, that's like 3 to 4 days of my time.
Yeah.
So you got to kind of think the same way.
Yeah.
For your second shooters.
Yep, I think when you are paying your second shooters, you want to also make sure if you want to get somebody that's reliable, that's going to be consistent, and you find somebody that's good, if you pay them above average for what everybody else is paying, you're going to be the first person they're going to want to go second shoot for and want to work for. So it might cost you, maybe it costs you an extra $5 an hour or something like that. At the end of the day, that's what that's a drop in the bucket. But to have that reliability and to have that person, you can count on them. I think find out kind of what the market average is and pay above that. You're gonna guarantee you're gonna have that person.
Or food for thought. Bryan kind of said something like this. Maybe if, as the lead photographer, photographer's listening to this, and you wanted to do it this way, you could say, well, normally I include, a second shooter or whatever part of your package, however you do it, but you have it in your package like to offer to the client, do you want a premium second shooter? Oh, the premium second
Mm-hmm.
shooter is my friend or another photographer, and we do this for each other, but I have to pay them a lot more because they're really good. Do you want to pay an extra $1,000 for the premium second shooter, and then you tack that on, and now you just paid for your second shooter or whatever you're going to charge them. So it's a business idea you could do.
Yep.
I have an add-on to this conversation that kind of wraps up both of Felipe's questions, and again, this is me getting a little bit bigger picture thinking, but I believe that as the photographer that runs the photography business, you can pay whatever you choose to pay, and I think that can be as high or as low as you want it to be. I think what it ultimately comes down to is as long as that's budgeted in your wedding package, aka don't just book a wedding and be like, oh yeah, I need to pay for a second shooter. What should I pay them? It's like, well, what did you budget in the package for that second shooter? Like, again, if you go back and listen to TWiP Weddings episode number 5, where we talk about pricing and calculating your pricing, we really get into the nooks and crannies of, well, how do you even figure out what to charge for a wedding? And when you're calculating what those inputs are and what you want to charge for a wedding, you can say, I've budgeted $1,000 for a second shooter. So there you go. That's what you pay. If you want to bring in like top quality second shooters, you want to pay them $2,000 for the wedding day, then budget for it, and you can do it. Like, you can do whatever you want in your business. That's why we run our own businesses. You just make sure that you're budgeting for it, and you're not saying, oh, I'm going to pay $800 for a second shooter, and then all of a sudden you haven't budgeted for that. So Bruce, like someone like you or I, like this is just, and I've actually run into this before, I'm so used to having my wife at the weddings with me, I actually don't have a budget for an assistant because it's my wife and I'm the sole breadwinner in the family, and so I provide the income for the family. So on those few occasions where I haven't had my wife at the wedding because she's had previous engagements or whatever it was, I've kind of left myself in a bad position because now I have to pay someone to be there with me,
Yep.
but I haven't budgeted for that. So I'm actually eating that expense.
Yep.
So that's not a good place to be. Whereas as opposed to if you've budgeted for it, then at least you can have whoever you want and pay them whatever you want to pay depending on what you've budgeted.
Yeah, we had that happen last year when my wife had her cancer diagnosis and wasn't able to second shoot for some of the weddings that we had, and so yeah, I did. I had to bring in some people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that it was fine, but it was that extra line item that unexpected. So
exactly.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, hopefully that helps Felipe a little bit with his questions. As always, if you have a question for the show, just email us twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com, and like Felipe, we may answer your question on a future episode. All right, before we wrap things up, our last segment is our picks of the week, and each episode we will share a photography-related item that we think would benefit wedding photographers. Our pick can be anything as long as it is somehow related to photography or the business of photography. Mr. Evans, I'm going to throw it over to you. What have you got for us this week? I think you've got a couple of picks for us this week.
Yeah, a couple of just other places you can read up about this. There is a great blog called F-Stoppers, and there's an article there by Trevor Daly that wrote a lot about this. And what was the other one? And I put the other. Oh yeah, the SLR Lounge. They have some great topics and articles on second shooting. But there's an app that I've had on my phone, and I downloaded it, and I've never really checked it out. But oddly enough, Bryan, it's called secondshooters.com.
Oh,
and
really?
Damn, somebody stole my Tinder idea.
There's a website that you can go to and you can see it, but it's for second shooting all over the world, and I think it works both ways for photographers and as well as second shooters. So you can put it, you can find a second shooter there, you can put yourself up there to be a second shooter there. Now I haven't really dug into it, but it seems fairly extensive. I know it's been around for a while. So again, you want to put yourself out there, second shooter. It's a good place to go. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention.
Awesome.
Bryan, what have you got for us?
I totally forgot that Robert had actually chosen this one a few weeks ago, but I'm going to stick with it anyways because I really think that it's valuable. It's thelawtog.com.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
I was going to second that, so go with it.
Yeah, good. There you go. So perfect. So Rachel runs it. She's a lawyer and a photographer, so she has all kinds of contracts and agreements that you can go and purchase and then adapt for your own needs. My suggestion would be that they have a second shooter contract over there. So a lot of photographers listening right now perhaps don't have an agreement that gets them set up with the proper legal structure and the legal sort of wording and contracts for having a second shooter. Head on over there right now, thelawtog.com, and grab a second shooter agreement and start using it.
Excellent. Great pick. Well, my pick this week, it's sort of not really related to second shooters per se, but it is about business and business planning. So my friend Corwin Hebert, I don't know if you guys are familiar with him. He runs the Tendim agency. He's kind of he handles business for a lot of creatives. One of his clients is David Duchemin. If you've heard of David, he's the guy behind Craft and Vision. So last year, Corwin released something called the Business Action Planner. And it's specifically for creatives and photographers. He works with a lot of photographers, and it's you can either get it as a PDF or it comes as an Evernote workbook. And it's basically a planning guide to help you if you're just maybe getting started in your business, or maybe you're in your business but you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants, and you want to get better control of your business itself. It really walks you through all the steps, and he has some associated. There's worksheets and different things, so it's a really great program. And Corwin's actually now starting to do some kind of hands-on one-day workshops kind of across Canada, and I'm going to be bringing him here to Edmonton to do a workshop in Edmonton this fall, and we're gonna do that here. So I wanted to make the Business Action Planner my pick for this week.
Very cool.
Yeah, and hopefully maybe we can even have Corwin on a future episode to talk about this stuff as well. So excellent. So again, we'll have links to everything that we talked about, all of our picks and everything that we talked about on this show. You'll find them on the blog post for this episode.
Excellent.
So I guess that's it. That brings us to the end of another episode of TWiP Weddings. Brian probably has a meeting to run off to, and I think Robert's got a really important meeting to run off to today. Big meeting going on today, so
Big meeting.
Big meetings. Awesome.
Lots of people are going to be at it.
Lots of people, like 20, 30,000 people.
At least.
Yeah, there might be hot dogs and beer at this meeting.
There could be.
Could be. Excellent. Well, enjoy that meeting. As always, we want to thank you guys for listening to the show. We want to hear from you, so be sure to send in your questions or comments for the show and share your thoughts by commenting on the blog post for this episode. So, before we wrap up, what's everybody up to, and where can our audience go if they want to find out what you guys are up to?
I am up to no good, and if you want to find me, all easy, robertevans.com at the website, at Robert Evans on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, Robert Evans Studios, or Robert Evans 101 is my Facebook page, but I'm primarily on Instagram and Facebook. Those are my places I like to hang out.
Nice. Mr. Caparici, where can we find you?
You can find me at www.sproutingphotographer.com. That's my educational hub where I teach and write and talk about everything to do with the business of photography. We also have a companion podcast that you can find there.
Yeah, what's going on? What's the latest? What have you got going on there?
Oh my goodness, we are doing crazy fun things. We've got partnerships with Shoot.edit, with SPTV, which is Sandy Putsch. We're doing all kinds of different collaborations and interviews. We do 2 episodes every other week and 3 episodes every other week. So we've got lots of fun and exciting things happening over there. Basically what we do is I sit down with another photographer, another business expert, an author, and I just dig deep into a particular business topic and really get into some of the actionable content in there. So that's really what we're about, is no fluff, actionable, step-by-step, process-driven business advice for photographers. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper or get some advice on something specific in your business, there's a good chance that we've covered that at some point, whether it's on the podcast or in an article. So sproutingphotographer.com is everything, Bryan. And I've talked about it a few times here on the show, and I'll just mention it again. We are building Sprout Studio. We're sort of, again, still deep right now in development or finishing up the development. We're growing our team. We're up to 10 now, and we're hiring another developer. So we are coming out with the industry's first all-in-one studio management software. So studio management, online galleries, album proofing, sales, marketing, questionnaires, invoicing, everything that you would need to do to run a successful business. Sprout Studio has the tools within it to allow you to do that.
And remember, if you want to work for Bryan, you don't have to know how to code. You just have to be a nice person. He'll teach you.
He'll teach you how to code. Yes.
This is true. This is true. Yes. I'm gonna have all kinds of emails now. That's what I'm up to, though. Bruce, how about you?
Excellent. Well, busy. It's wedding season. I am also in the process of becoming a master at the Arcanum.
Oh,
which is
cool.
Trey Ratcliffe's sort
Hmm.
of mentorship website that he set up there. And so I'm just kind of getting into the process. I have some work to do to get myself, ready, and then hopefully I will start taking on cohorts on the Arcanum. So be on the lookout for that coming soon. So yeah, busy doing that, and then yeah, we're just knee deep in wedding season here. So I survived an 18-hour Indian wedding that I second shot a couple weeks ago. So that was fun. I'm awake and alive, but otherwise, yeah, just busy shooting, editing, and yeah, living life. So if you
Awesome.
want to find me, you can find me over at my website, which is momentsindigital.com. There you'll find a blog and keep up with what we're up to. If you're looking for me on the social networks, the Twitters and the Instagrams and whatnot, you'll just find me. I'm at Bruce Clark, and that's with Clark with an E at the end.
Cool. Can I just give a quick plug? What Peter and Trey are doing over at the Arcanum is really, really amazing. They're really sort of rethinking what education looks like today and kind of having a bit of a gamification and sort of a new modern twist on what education is like. And I think it's really interesting. I think they've got a really good thing going. So I think anyone that's listening that is sort of interested in that sort of master apprentice model of learning and growing as a photographer, as an artist, as a business person, I think the Arcanum is a great place to go for that.
Yeah, I'm excited and really honored to be, I've been invited to it and getting involved in it. So I'm looking
Cool.
forward to it. So
Cool.
excellent. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of TWiP Weddings. Be sure to visit our website at thisweekinphoto.com/wedding. And once again, thanks for listening to TWiP Weddings, raising the bar one wedding at a time.
Nice.